If you're ready to shed some tears, just have to take an extra dosage of your antidepressants. If you're going to ask for one more therapy session, well, you've come to the right place because, well, that's what we do on this channel. We talk about very upsetting, depressing things happening. And today we're going to be talking about probably some of the most upsetting and saddest things out there. And that has a lot to do with the MCU. I know what you guys are thinking, but the last two MCU films were actually pretty good. I mean, they got overall some pretty good criticism, some good reviews. I think maybe Captain America not so much, but Thunderbolts is, being considered one of the best MCU films since Endgame, and I thoroughly agree with that. But I enjoyed both of the films. I think Captain America had some great moments and is almost as good as the Thunderbolts. They're both like emotional roller coaster rides. Great performances, amazing character development. Absolutely enjoyed both films. But we're not here to talk about the films themselves. We're actually here to talk a little bit more about what all of this led to, okay? Because we haven't really covered too much about the smashing success that they had at the box office, right? That's what they did. No, not really. Let's be brutally honest. This is the era of cinema that we live in. And just to put things into perspective, in case you guys are wondering exactly how much movies are making nowadays, the latest Mission Impossible film, which was supposed to like shatter records across the globe, as of the moment of this recording, and we're heading into the third weekend of this film's release, it's sitting at about $400 million. Now, granted, this is supposed to surpass anything that the MCU has done in the last few years, and it's supposed to be like semi-successful in terms of the box office revenue as well as critical reception. The film is projected to make about like high 500s to low 600s, so about like 590 to low 600 million dollars. Is that good enough? I mean, in today's landscape, that's actually not that bad. And to compare another film to what we've seen from the MCU recently, we have, for example, the Minecraft film, which ended up being one of the most trending films of the year, probably of the last few years. And that film ended up making about 900 million. I think it fell short of the 1 billion. But that's only because it garnered a ton of attention. It started trending online. There were a ton of memes behind it, not to mention there's a giant consumer base. I mean, children love Minecraft, and there are people that have been playing Minecraft now for, like about 20 years. So granted, the film just had already kind of a semi-decent foundation to build on. And I think that really kind of helped the film launch itself to almost $1 billion, sorry. However, the Mission Impossible film is just a perfect example of the landscape right now. And to come back full circle, the Thunderbolts film as well as Captain America Brave New World, both of them are essentially going to land about in the same area. Thunderbolts is still an ongoing film. It's still in theaters, and they're projecting it's only going to make a few more million at the box office. So let's assume they're both. And by the way, this is just an estimate because different websites have different numbers. I don't know if there's like one specific official number or official website that we go to look that up, but just like a pure estimate here, it appears that Captain America made in the low 400s. So I'm assuming like around 410 to 420. And then Thunderbolts so far has made about 390 million. By the time everything wraps up, I think they should be at about the same point. So both of these films made roughly about 400 and like 10 to 15 to 20 million dollars, which is completely surpassing the last few films from the MCU or just comic book based films in the last few years. I think they're kind of headed in the right direction. However, we should take into consideration the different situations here. Like the Thunderbolts is a film that had a budget of about like almost 200 million. I would say it's under that with marketing and everything. It probably went way up there. I'm assuming it's probably closer to about like 300 million. The big difference here is Captain America Brave New World, because there were a ton of reshoots that had to take place pretty consistently throughout the film's post-editing process. There are rumors out there that the budget for this film is well over $200 million. That's not accounting for marketing. So I do believe that Captain America is probably one of those films that, unfortunately, even though it has a decent box office showing, it's probably not going to be very profitable. Whereas in Thunderbolts, I think it was semi-profitable. Let's not forget that it's not all just about the box office revenue. There are a lot of things attached to it. There's a ton of merchandising that, you know, gets sold along with those films, whether it's backpacks, t-shirts. We now see popcorn buckets. I mean, just simple little things like that that add a little bit more towards that overall box office number. However, having said all of that, the main reason why I wanted to make today's video is essentially just talking about the insane pressure that the Fantastic Four film is under. Not only have the last few films essentially been bleeding money, like there are projections out there that say that Thunderbolts might have lost like about $100 million. And then there are other projections that say that Captain America Brave New World potentially could have lost upwards of $200 million if you account for the actual budget and then marketing as well. And then in the case of Captain America, the reshoots. So it only makes sense that there's just this immense amount of expectations when it comes down to Fantastic Four, where not only are they leading up to a higher number, because it appears that with every single film that they've been releasing recently, they kind of upped the bar a little bit. With Captain America Brave New World, you were able to hit 400 with, you know, a much bigger budget. And then Thunderbolts, the budget was a little bit more modest, and so I think they probably lost a little bit, or I should say much less money than with Captain America Brave New World. And so I think the projection, or, you know, the pattern here is that the Fantastic Four film is at least able to break even, or, you know, jump the hurdle and become a profitable MCU movie. There's just no way that Marvel continues just releasing film after film while losing, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars. It just doesn't make sense. There's no way that they can go down this path. I think if for any reason the Fantastic Four film fails, I think that there is a real world possibility that everything that we see in the foreseeable future from Disney, it just goes straight to Disney Plus. It's like very low budget, cheap looking shows on Disney Plus. I've said it before, I love the Daredevil Born Again Disney Plus series. However, it looked cheap. It looked like they just didn't have the budget. It looked like they had a bunch of constraints when it came down to certain sequences and certain scenes in the film, or in the live action series, sorry. And I feel like that's going to be the future if this film isn't profitable. Not to mention, let's not forget, there are a couple of other films that are going to be released within that same time frame. You have the newest Jurassic Park film, and then you have Superman. Those are two big heavy hitters, and from time to time we see, you know, one of those films kind of become a little bit of a vacuum. We didn't see this back in the day because people actually went to watch movies at the movie theater, but the numbers clearly show that that's just not something that people do nowadays. I think, you know, the pandemic definitely had a lot to do with it, but as time has gone by, I think the newer generations are just not interested in going to movie theaters and actually, you know, experiencing some of these films, even though some of them are pretty good. As I said, I genuinely enjoyed both Captain America and Thunderbolts, and I continue to suggest those films should be watched in a movie theater, but maybe Fantastic Four is the one to break the mold for Marvel. At the end of the day, I think there's a ton of pressure here, not only to, I should say, to at least bare minimum break even, but I think the expectations are going to be much higher for this film. There's no way that they accept anything less than breaking even. There's no way that they're going to continue or move forward with the plans for the MCU if they continue to lose upwards of $100 million with each one of these projects. And as I said at the beginning of the video, yes, they do sell a bunch of merchandising, you know, whether it's popcorn buckets, t-shirts, backpacks, things of that nature, and they can, you know, make a little bit on the back end. There just isn't enough to overcompensate for those losses at the movie theaters. Let's not forget, we're coming from an MCU era just a few years ago, I would say like almost a decade ago, that would, you know, some of these films were making $1 billion. In the case of Endgame, $2 billion. And even the lower end MCU films were making about like $600 to $700 million. Yes, it's a completely different era, but still it's very reasonable to expect that most of these MCU entries at least make a few $100 million, and in most cases they're struggling to even hit $100 million. We've seen so many great examples like Morbius. We saw Madam Web really struggle. I know those are mostly Sony films, but you had the Marvels, for example, also struggle at the box office. So this is the real Endgame. This is this final phase where if the MCU doesn't start raking in just a ton of cash, there could be some real world ramifications, and I think a lot of these projects could eventually be canceled. We've already seen a lot of the newer MCU films actually be pushed back, and I think a lot of that has to do with the lack of confidence. I think they're starting to kind of put the brakes a little bit, kind of push back everything, wait and see how the Fantastic Four film does, and then based on that, decide what it is that they're going to do in the very near future. So it is a very sad situation, and I'm honestly not feeling great about the Fantastic Four film, but I'm being very hopeful so far, at least through it during this stretch. I thoroughly enjoyed the MCU. So I'm hoping that this is just another great entry, and hopefully people show up to watch this film. But as always, this is just my personal opinion, my personal take. I'm very curious to see what you guys have to say. Do you guys plan on showing up for Fantastic Four? Do you plan on supporting the MCU? Are you hardcore fans or are you casuals? I'm very curious to see what everybody has to say. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. As always, if you guys enjoy this type of content, make sure to stay tuned because we are starting to upload way more consistently. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'll see you guys in the next one.